the DAWbench Radio Show, the official podcast of DAWbench.com.
Welcome to the DAWbench Radio Show. I am Curigliano of AAVIM Technology in Melbourne, Australia. And I'm joined again today, co-hosting by Pete Brown of Microsoft in Maryland in the United States. How you going, Pete?
Good. How are you, Vin?
Mate, fantastic. No, I'm very, very good. We're midway through spring. You know, Melbourne spring means a lot of rain.
Yeah,
but it's good. You know, everything's kind of waking up, and you know, it's great time in Melbourne. You guys will be starting to head into late autumn.
Yeah, we're in fall, and it's been all about Windows 11 here this fall. So I've been busy as mad. Yeah,
I was about to say, you've been very, very busy with Windows 11, so you've been on radio silence a bit, but we can cover that a little bit later, I think, you know. That'll come up in conversation a little bit later, I think.
I'm sure it will.
I'm sure it will. Now, today we have a special guest from Linköping in Sweden, and that is Niklas Odelholm, who is the co-founder and VP of products at Softube, who are a highly respected leading software developer specializing in component-level analog modeling. Welcome, Niklas.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's really nice to be here.
You're most welcome, Niklas.
Even if we don't have spring here, but you know.
Well, we're kind of, look, we're at polar opposites. So, you know, when I'm heading into the depths, you guys are, getting the sun and spring. So it all balances out, you know.
Yeah.
How I always like to start the shows is just a quick overview of any history that I've had either personally or with the DAWbench project. Now, with Softube, I mean, I go back a long way. And there is two aspects of where Softube has crossed paths with me, and both of them are very, very important. One was that in some of the earlier DAWbench benchmark suites, there were multiple software plugins that were part of the test sessions. So that was one aspect. And they were a very important part of the testing regimen back then. But also, DAWbench itself, I mean, there's two aspects to it. One is the CPU comparative performance data that we present, which that work I've actually passed on to a close friend and colleague, Pete Kane over at Scan, who has better access to a wider range of different models of machines across Intel and AMD, where I'm more Intel focused. And the other aspect, which I still maintain, is the digital audio interface low latency performance database. And where that becomes very important is that the focus is driver, low latency performance, stability and efficiency, and round trip latency. And where that is important is that, I have people that have asked, have actually questioned what I'm doing with that low latency performance database, saying, look, it's not really relevant to a lot of people. And I've even had accusations that I'm simply baffling people with bullshit because, what kind of percentage of people are really needing that low latency performance. And, the challenge numerous times have been, well, give me a working case scenario, a real world working case scenario. I said, easy, guitar amp simulators, because that is where it's imperative and it's very, very important that you have a very low round trip latency and stability and efficiency at that respective latency. Now, people are different, but anything above 3 or 4 milliseconds, people start feeling, and depending on the actual individual guitarist, once you start getting in above that 4 millisecond, 5, 6, 7, 8, it starts interfering with their playing. And of course, the argument was always, well, in a stage or a room environment, if you're 10 foot away, that's 6 milliseconds. And we had this discussion in our little prelim chat, Niklas, where I've said, if you're in a room and you've got an amp cranking, you kind of compensate for that 6 milliseconds. Where if you're in a studio environment and you're not on headphones and you're in a monitoring environment, back in the monitoring room, everything's accumulative. So you've got whatever the round trip latency is, plus the distance, and everything starts feeling a bit fuzzy. So
I also strongly suspect that has a bit to do with volume. I mean, if I play music using the computer and monitoring system, and I can hear just a tiny bit of the direct audio from the guitar or bass, like, the pick hitting the string.
Yep.
And hearing that comes, just a millisecond before what comes back from the speaker, then it's super annoying.
Yeah.
But I also think that, you can get adapted to pretty high latencies if you have to. Stage musicians throughout the decades have shown that.
Yeah.
But it's, of course, preferable to have a low latency.
Yep.
It's just simply more comfortable.
Yeah, and that was the point that I was making. So it is kind of like not weird, but it is a something that I've noticed that I could play, like you said, in a rehearsal or a stage environment, loud volume. You're always compensating. You get into a studio environment. I know that anything above 4 milliseconds, I start feeling a bit weird. At 6 millisecond, that's pretty much my limit. Anything above that, I'm like, But I've spoken to individuals, especially jazz musicians, are really, really picky to the timing and stuff. So, and sometimes it comes back to the competency of the player as well. So if you're a really competent keyboard player, you're going to start feeling it at 6. Where if you're, more, you're not as competent and you're just more, maybe keyboards is your second instrument and stuff, you're going to be able to, manage that higher latency. But again, it comes down to the individual. So that, just coming full circle, that's where the DAWbench work is really, really important with the guitar amp simulators. And this leads us directly to you guys, because Softube, you were one of the leaders in the guitar amp modeling in the early days. So I think what would be great is if you can give us a personal overview of your history in regards to music and technology, and the journey that actually led you to being one of the co-founders of Softube.
Yeah, I'm going to make it brief. I've always played music. I'm a bass and piano player, jazz, R&B. Mm-hmm. And I'm also a computer engineer. It's like math is fun, music is fun, easier to make a living as an engineer than as a musician. I mean, I tried as a musician, but realized, quite early that I should probably go back to engineering school.
Yep.
But never really lost sight of the, can I be a part of the music industry somehow? So while at engineering school, it was, you're looking at different stuff that happens in the academia, like things like MP3 were going on back then. And, basically realizing that, okay, I need to write a master thesis somewhere, somehow. And I don't want to be part of the military industry, which is a big thing here in Linköping. And if I go into the medical industry, which is like the other thing you can do if you have a master in signal processing, like military industry or medical imaging, then I need to be, clean shaven and have a nice,
priorities.
Yeah.
So it's, okay, should I go into academia, do a PhD or something in like compression I think that was the thing closest at hand, because I had a professor that was part of the whole MPEG thing. But it turned out that a former classmate of mine was working in one of the computer labs on a Marshall amp. And it's like, the sky opens up and then you see
Yeah, that looks more interesting.
I knock on the door and it's like, hey, was it Oscar, your name? We took some classes together and that's a JCM 800. And what are you guys doing? I want to be a part of that.
Awesome, yeah.
So it turned out that Oscar and a friend of his, they were, basically doing a master thesis, trying to figure out if they could do a better job than the competitor out there at the time, the Line 6 pod, the red bean shaped thing.
Yep, the little kidney bean. Yep, I had one of those. Yep.
So they did the whole component modeling thing of the preamp. And, I just tagged along. I wrote my thesis on loudspeaker nonlinearities. And while I was writing my thesis, they started a company that was to be Softube, together with the professor at the university.
Okay, that's interesting. Yep.
So he was, I think he was the one that, basically pushed everything and said that, okay, you need to try it, see what's going to happen.
Nice.
And it's like, yeah, I'm going to give it half a year, and then we'll probably find something else to do. But I mean, it's post IT crash. It's not like we're going to find another job.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it was terrible. But one good thing was that there was a lot of different state and regional funding available, because you had a lot of unemployed IT engineers after the whole 2000 thing.
Yeah, the bubble crash. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So we managed to get a very, very tiny amount of money to keep us afloat for a little while. Basically just setting up the business, working out how we should do this and all that. And it's like, yeah, let's give it 6 months or a year while my wife is doing her PhD, and then I will figure out something else to do.
Yep. What year was that, Niklas?
In 2003.
Right, 2003.
Yeah.
Yep. Awesome. And so how many of you actually founded the company?
So technically it was the professor, Oscar, and Oscar's friend Pad. They were the three on paper founding the company. I was part of the whole process, and Arvid and Torsten came in very early.
Yes.
Arvid was a friend of mine. We played music together. He's a trombone player. He came back from Stanford, and I know that he had an interest in tube amps because he brought he didn't bring a T-shirt from Stanford. He brought a box full of weird Russian tubes and transformers.
Brilliant. Yeah.
So it's like, Arvid, you need to be a part of this.
Yeah.
And Torsten came in, and he wanted to be a part of this, and doing. He started with working on optimizations for different chips. So like, the standard ones out there back then, the 56K, the Shark, I think some ARM thing, early ARM, TI chips and stuff like that.
Right. So you guys were really early on with the DSP stuff as well.
Yeah, because I mean, the whole, there were no plug-in business really. We did some. We were looking into that area quite early, see if is there any possibility at all doing this, selling software, and everyone said that absolutely not.
Hmm.
You know, we were speaking to, there were no online business in 2003. It's, you know, it's kind of weird to think of it, but it was non-existent. When we set up our first own shop in, you know, the web page in, I can't remember when it was, 2007, 2008, something. There were like 2 different e-commerce systems that it can use. We had heard rumors that Google was going to do a like Google Pay button or something like that. But there were absolutely, I mean, just having a system where you could enter info and deliver a software license, I mean, it didn't exist.
No.
So we had to build all that from scratch. And actually, as a, you know, side note there, we had this system, the business back end of this running up until I think 3 years ago.
Wow.
2-3 years ago.
Okay.
Which is weird. But anyway, where were we? Yeah, we started a company. We didn't think it was going to last, but it was fun. We spent a lot of time in the beginning just doing the math and making the engines that could make the math work. Trying to license our technology to different other companies in the business.
Yes.
You know, mostly like people that already have a DSP chip somewhere, and they need to have some algorithms running on it.
Yep.
And that's where we were planning to come in.
So was that, how early was your involvement with TC Power Core? Because I had a really heavy involvement with, not with the development side, but with the marketing and product support for it here in Australia.
It was, I can't remember. Maybe 2007.
Okay, so that's later on. Yeah.
2006 maybe, when the TubeTech C1B came out. It was like, it was a lot of fun these days, early days, because since we wanted to license technology and didn't care about selling to an end customer, we went to the trade shows, you know, started at one aisle, said, "Hi, we're Softube. We do this. Are you interested?" Basically.
Yep.
Speaking to everyone. The next year is like, "Oh, it's the Softube guys. They're nice. They're fun to have a beer with."
Yeah.
And after 2 years, like, "I know you guys." So after a couple of years at the trade shows, we pretty much knew everyone.
Yep. So were you in the basement at NAMM? Because that's usually where all the startups hang out.
We walked around the floor a lot.
Okay, yeah.
And spoke to people and hang out in bars. And
yep.
Because that's where business is made in the MI industry.
Oh, yeah. NAMM was, yeah, I did a couple of NAMM shows. My memory, or very foggy memory of my NAMM experiences was there was a lot of drinking.
Yeah, it is.
I'm impressed you can remember that at all, Vin.
I did say cloudy and foggy, mate. There was a lot of drinking, mate.
I think it's probably to our advantage that we were, 25, 26 when we,
yes,
did all that. It would have been much harder now.
Yeah. So was Power Core before or after Amp Room?
Before.
Right.
So I think that TC and Marshall was probably the first two companies that we decided to work together with.
Right. Yeah.
So we probably started the whole TC thing in, 2005 maybe.
Right. Okay. Yep. Yeah, that feels about right. Yeah, because I was involved with the TC stuff from around 2003, or actually even earlier, I think. But I do remember that you guys were on TC, but I couldn't remember whether the involvement with TC was pre Amp Room, and Amp Room was the first native plugin, guitar amp plugin that I remember made some inroad. So can you tell us a little bit about that and the Marshall? That was the thing that that was the breakthrough, so to speak, when it comes.
Yeah, it was. We had back then. We had a little box with a PCB and a Shark chip on it, some ADDA conversion, running our amp models.
Oh, really?
But before that, we had a CD with some sound examples. And that wasn't too impressive for most companies except Marshall. Mm-hmm. They took a listen to that CD and said that, hey, this is really good. Can't you build a prototype? So we did that. We built that prototype. We brought it to a lot of trade shows, like, sideshow, hotel room demo thing.
Yep, not on the floor. Yep.
No, exactly. And I must tell you, it's interesting bringing a piece of home soldered PCB rack gear through airplane security. But the thing is, it's super hard in Europe. Then when you arrive in the US, it's like, what is this?
Yeah.
Oh, it's a prototype of a. Yeah. I can see what it is. But what kind of amp models do you have in it?
Oh, right.
It's like everyone is a unemployed musician.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Especially
airport security
in Los Angeles. Yes, for sure. Yeah.
But anyway, we had this prototype and we brought it along, and Marshall liked it. So I think we started the whole Marshall thing as early as 2004.
Wow. Okay.
And developed. It took a long time. I mean, we developed, made the PCBs for that amp that came out in, I think, 2008, 2009 or so, called the JMD1, and also a bunch of amp models and effects and stuff like that. In the meanwhile, we were doing the other licensing work for TC Electronic, for Roger Nichols Digital was a company back then.
Oh, I remember them.
Brainworks.
Yes.
Abbey Road. Basically doing stuff for them, plugins or DSP things. But after a while, we realized that we could probably try this ourselves, make the products ourselves.
Oh, so your initial apart from amp room, your initial modeling, let's say, of the vintage rack gear, you weren't doing that for yourself. You were doing that for third parties. Am I correct there? Right. Okay, that's cool.
And we were actually doing amp room for a third party as well. But they backed out. They canceled their whole, computer audio division and things like that.
Right.
So we basically decided to do it ourselves. We had set up some sort of web shop, which was more difficult than we had imagined back then.
Yeah.
So we actually did a worldwide distribution agreement with TC.
Yes.
Who had the infrastructure. So TC for the first year was our distributor.
Right.
And back then we only had amp room for TDM and PowerCore.
Oh, so it wasn't native yet.
No.
Right. Okay. And so when was the native transition? Do you remember what year that was?
Probably just a year after.
Right.
Probably around the same time as we set up our own web shop.
Right.
So
what's that, around
2007, 2008.
Okay.
Maybe.
All right. Perfect. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Yep.
Adobe Flash was still around. We had it on our web page.
I think there isn't it, mate. I'm sure there's web pages that have still got that thing on there. I hope not, but there'll be some old websites still around with that thing on there.
But I mean, it was fun. We were 4 people, starting to get some did some customer support whenever we felt like doing something else. We shared a bottle of wine on Fridays and had marketing Fridays.
Yep.
It was a different kind of business for us, very technologically focused engineers, and suddenly, selling to an end user.
Yeah.
But I don't regret it one single bit.
No, and you've got a company with 4 friends doing what you love, and it's awesome. Awesome.
It's a storybook startup story.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we have our agreement among the owners is to make stuff that is cool, basically.
Yeah.
That's what we want to do.
Yeah.
That's what we want to spend our money on.
Yeah. And look, the product range is, there's definitely some big names in the lot of plugins that you guys have actually released. So it's not only, Tube Tech and Marshall. And then you've got things like Solid State Logic and Drama, Chandler, Buchla, Trident, even Weiss. I think Weiss, that's how you pronounce it. So, Weiss. There you go. So
Weiss.
Yeah, Weiss.
with a V. Oh, there we go. Weiss. All right. And so that's a pretty impressive, list of names of products that you guys have actually modeled up. Now,
yeah, it is.
Yeah. Now, one thing I do want to, because I've been wrapping my head around as best I can component level modeling. So I've been reading as much as I can and trying to get, as informed as I possibly could. This whole area intrigues me, Niklas. The whole component level stuff. So, do you want to talk a little bit about the modeling techniques and the differences? Because my early foray into modeling or guitar amp modeling was that little red kidney bean pod that you mentioned earlier. And look, I had one of the beta units that the rep handed me, and back in this is late 90s, early 2000s. I was doing some, melodic prog metal type of stuff, so I needed a high gain, very saturated type of sound, and I wasn't getting it with what was available back then. And so he hands me this little red kidney bean thing, and I'm flicking through the models, and there's a thing, the checker plate rectifier thing. I'm going, yeah, right, that's going to sound like a rectifier. And so I had a very close friend who's an awesome and brilliant guitarist come over, and we've plugged it in and we started tracking with it. And at the time we were like, wow, this thing is just amazing compared to what was available at the time. But just the end point to that story was that, so we're talking stuff that I'd recorded, I think it was around 99 to 2001, somewhere around there. And I revisited those tracks probably around 2015, 2016. I just fired up the old sessions and I went, that doesn't really sound that good. So back then, I was mind blown. We come back 15, 16 years later, I've gone, ugh, okay, there wasn't any air in the sound, it wasn't very dynamic. So what I did is I inserted some of the more current guitar amp simulator plugins, ran them through a clean valve channel, and ran them through a couple of cabinet simulators. And the whole thing came to life, and it was amazing. And I had that friend over on a visit, and I fired up the old sessions. I said, "Do you remember these things?" He's going, "Yeah." I went, "Okay, have a listen to this." And he's just like, "What the? How the hell did you manage that?" I went, "Well, I did this, this, and this." I said, "You don't necessarily need to run the tones through the current guitar amp sims. I basically reamped it through a clean channel, Niklas. But the difference was night and day, So
yeah, and I mean that is one doing IRs, impulse responses, the way most cab sims do today, wasn't really feasible back then.
No, well, just,
So it was like, I'm still super impressed by, Altiverb back then, how they managed to do all those calculations and, almost negative CPU. That's some really amazing optimization skill set. I think that he even had it running on the TDM, the 56K chips, which is just, mind-blowing. Yeah. But anyway, for the mere mortals, IRs were sort of out of the question. It's, same thing for the Line 6 pod. So, that is definitely something that has improved over the years. Not the modeling technology, because that's, super basic, but, just the fact that we have more power available.
Yes. Well, yeah. So just as a bit of an overview, and you can go as in-depth as you like, the different modeling techniques. So is there a snapshot kind of modeling compared to component modeling, or is there stuff in between? Can you give us some oversight on that? Not oversight, sorry. Can you give us an overview on that, please?
On a specific product, or
No, just the actual different modeling techniques.
Oh yeah. It's like it's very difficult to do snapshots with something that is modulated or time-based or distorting or dynamic, stuff like that. It is possible, but it tends to take much, much more CPU than what anyone is, willing to use. And it's not really good. The next step up is, basically what most good engineers did. And that is to basically, off the cuff a little bit, trying to figure out what's going on. A guitar amp is probably a filter, and then some sort of clipper, and then some sort of EQ. And then you put these blocks together, and then you tune it a little bit, and then, hey, it sounds like a guitar amp. Sort of more of a tuning, sound design way of getting the sound.
Right.
And the ones that are good at that make some amazing products from the sound design concept. But when it comes to component model, it's like you almost don't even care about how it sounds, because you work the math and you try to figure out exactly how the circuit works, and then you end up with something that sounds like the original, words and all. So when it comes to, for instance, in many cases with modern guitar sounds, it's could probably even be easier to sound design your way to the perfect amp sound than doing the component model thing, because you get a more pre-produced sound that way. But we're geeks. We like to do it the hard way.
So when you do that, do you actually say, okay, here are the 27 components that are in the path, and there's a capacitor, and I know here's its capacitance and ESR and stuff, and then you plug that in, doing something like Spice, or do you kind of resolve the whole thing down to kind of a short equation where you have the input sound and the output sound, or like how does that work?
It's more the latter. We early on we built an engine where we can insert the net, sort of the nodes and the of a schematic or of a circuit where different parts have different properties, like a capacitance could be its Laplace variant of the capacitance. It's derivative nature of that circuit. And then you do the math, or actually you let the computer do the math and end up with an equation if it's a linear system.
Right.
And sometimes you need to do, pre-bake it. You need to divide it into subnets or, in some way by hand, because the numeric properties of the system is too difficult to handle for a computer. And I mean, it really depends. In some sense, it's figuring out the schematic is often about how can we divide the schematic? Where do we have any isolating blocks that allows us to calculate different things separate from other things? Modern pieces of gear are often, like a modern EQ is often divided by op-amps, which effectively isolates part of the circuit from each other, so they don't influence each other.
Right.
That is easy, and you also have probably have all the components are well behaved and all that. But if you go to a old 60s, 70s passive EQ, then everything can be just a single net. And none of the components are well behaved. You have chokes and capacitors that behave nothing like chokes and capacitors.
Right, brilliant.
So where do you start with that? Do you open up the 19, let's say it's the 1970s EQ, right? Would you open that up and start taking measurements, or would you open it up and look and see which components it has? Or
well, first of all, you start with info you have. If you have a schematic, sometimes you just need to draw the schematic. So you insert the schematic with ideal components like the resistors, the capacitors, behaving like the textbook versions of that. And then you see where you go wrong. And I mean, we've been doing this for almost 20 years. So it's like you can almost see, when you see the front plate of the gear, that, okay, this capacitor won't be well behaved. It's going to have a resonance up in the,
Yeah.
And then we have, we have different models that we made for different, parts that didn't behave well. Sometimes you use those. You do some measurements on, you could put put part of the circuits or a component in a rig. Sometimes you need, a part of the circuit in a test rig to be able to do some proper measurements on it. Sometimes you can, use models that are actually documented in academic literature. Sometimes you need to, figure out something new.
Right.
And sometimes it's just about building test rigs and test circuits on how you can measure this device. We had troubles with 60s photoresistor and a 60s light bulb that was used in a compressor.
Yeah.
So both the photoresistor and the light was behaving very, very, very weirdly. So, we need to separate them. We need to have some super fast, super high bandwidth light to trigger the photoresistors. We need to have some super good photoresistor that we can read the light from, and then, try to figure out how they work in tandem and so forth. I think it took us 3 months for that single component to figure out a good model for.
All right. So how many of these have you let the smoke out of when you were doing this work?
Quite a few.
Yeah. A little destructive testing.
Yeah. I mean, it's much worse with guitar amps than like line level audio equipment. But we had a guitar amp that was an American guitar amp from the 60s that was sold in Sweden in the 60s, so they had to change the transformer in Sweden in the 60s to 220 volts.
Right. Yep.
And I can say that amp has never ever, during its 50-year existence before we put our hands on it, it's never ever been played on full volume. Because if you do, you will notice that the cords from the 220 transformers cannot carry that amount of power.
Oh, right. Wow. Okay. Yeah.
So you can toast things on it, yes.
Yeah, and the transformer burnt and everything was just, shit happens.
Lab fire.
It was a little bit. It was a little bit worse when we, had gear from the Marshall Museum.
Oh,
It's like, this is the Marshall Bluesbreaker, the one unit.
you didn't smoke that one though, did you?
No, we didn't.
Boy.
We were extremely careful. But on the same hand, we need to really stress the guitar amps in order to see how they behave.
Yep, of course. Yeah. Well, that's interesting with the 220 volt because we're 240 here. So
I think we're 230 or 235 nowadays. Actually.
So what you're so are you saying that if you run some amps at 240 instead of the 110, you can't drive them as hard? That's going to be interesting for all the metalheads in Australia.
It's more like the cheap ass general agent in Sweden in the 60s.
Put a crappy transformer in, right? Okay,
yeah.
Okay, yeah. Cut a few corners, right? I get you.
Yeah, and he's not a cheap ass. He's a good guy,
right?
So,
But hey, what's a studio fire between friends? Don't worry about that.
Right.
we do have in our lab a big off button next to the door, and we do have fire extinguishers.
I was about to say, and a few fire extinguishers around the lab.
Yeah.
That's a classic. It's a bloody classic. Now, I've noticed that you guys have moved into synthesizers. Now, you started with the modular.
Yeah. They don't burn that easily.
No, but look, no. I tell you what, I remember back in the day, I had a client that came in with an old Prophet 5, beautiful last Rev Prophet 5, that had been in a case for, I don't know, he hadn't fired it up in probably 10, 15 years, and he's brought it in. This is in my past life in the 90s when I was working for a pro audio place. And I was the synth specialist, amongst other things. And so I've cracked this open. I've gone, oh, man, Rev 3 Prophet 5. I said, can I turn it on? He says, sure, Vin. So we pull it out.
Oh, no.
Yeah, you know where this is going. So I pull it out, plug it in, turn it on, smoke, right? I blew the thing up. And I've gone, straight to the repairers. I mean, it wasn't fatal, but I mean, that scared the shit out of me, you know?
Yeah.
So synthesizers, I have seen synthesizers smoke up as well. But the two new products that caught my eye, and they're not under, any particular brand, but I recognize they're very highly recognizable for me because I've owned one and I've been all over the second one. Very nice.
Thank you.
They're very, very nice. I just, just a bit of a listen with the walkthrough, and I've just gone, yeah, I think I'll be, getting a hold of those. Yes, and then I went into remorse because I sold one of them.
Yeah, but now you have the software, so it's okay.
Yes, at component level models as well, so it'll behave exactly the same.
So Vin, is this the Model 84 and the 72 on their site?
Yes, correct. Yeah. Yes, the 84 nice. Is what I had. I've been all over the 72s, but was never lucky enough to own one, and I was all over the reissues as well. And I had a little micro Moog, which is probably the closest, but no, it's not really that close. But I did have some nice analog gear, which I covered in some other shows, so I won't bore the people now. But I was chatting to Niklas last week in a little pre-chat, and I was in remorse of every analog synth that I sold. I'm just kicking myself. I've got a room full of nice 90s digital stuff. But all the analog stuff I sold off, and I'm hanging my head, But hey, I can relive some of those glory days now. I think with the
exactly. The thing is, I don't do much modeling nowadays, so my knowledge on the on the modeling stuff is EQs, amps, compressors, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
when the guys are doing the synths, it's some really, really impressive shit that they're doing. It's it's really state of the art, and it works amazingly well.
Yeah, yeah.
So, and I mean, it's not. It's one thing getting the equations right, and that is usually. I mean, with the synth, it's not that difficult, but it's an entirely different thing to transfer the math into something that runs on a processor in a defined time slice that sounds good and have in the discrete time system. That whole thing is a different type of expertise that we are very proud of.
Yes.
Having. We spend a lot of time on going from the Platonic ideal world of equations into something that runs on a chip, because it's that is usually where people fail, because it's kind of a boring part of it. You did all the math, you did all the equations, everything looks good. Now you just need to get it to run in a 44K environment, and then you start to see all kind of stuff breaking down. You see that 32-bit floating point isn't enough. You see, there's a lot of stuff happening there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of my kind of litmus tests for analog model synthesizers is if I can get it to self-oscillate. Because that was one of the things I used to have fun with my early analog synths, is that, crank in the resonance and then set the filter down and then just sit there, see if I can get all those all those microtonal type of things. And the oscillators aren't even, all it is just pure resonance and self-oscillation. That was my big test. And, those early...
I think that explains where your hearing went, Ben.
What hearing, mate? Yeah. Well, that's why... Well, that's why I've got a constant ring. But look, that was one of the things I used to have some fun with, and I remember when all of my 90s digital synths, and as much as I love them, my JD800 and JD990s, and I got my Kurzweils, and none of them self-oscillate. There's not a hope.
No.
There's no hope. No. I mean, and you can hear the stepping if you really kind of pay attention, but. And I love those synthesizers, but it's not the same. And I remember when I was working in the front line in the retail, being the synth specialist, and the reps would come in with these synthesizers, and the first thing I'd ask them is, does it have a resonant filter? And they'd say no. I said, well, it's not a synth. They go, what do you mean it's not a synth? Yeah. Well, if it doesn't have a resonant filter, it's a sample playback instrument. I know that was a bit harsh with some of them, because some of them.
You're gonna get all sorts of comments now, Ben.
Oh, look, hey.
You know what my litmus test for that was, back in the day, I had the HS60, which was the Juno 106 with speakers.
Yes.
And I would crank up the amp with the chorus on and not play anything at night. And it would, how people buy those like noise machines now to go to sleep? I would just have this ocean wave sound that was just playing in my room that helped me go to sleep. That's a litmus test for a Juno now.
And you were wondering where my hearing went.
Yeah.
We had, when we did, let's see, it was the Marshall Plexi. And it's the Marshall Plexi, the one that from their museum that they use when they need to make a reissue of the Marshall Plexi. They use that amp to see how it should sound. So we're basically doing some A/B testing. And in order to make the A/B testing comparable, we use a specialized... we don't play it through a speaker when we're just testing the power amp. We have built ourselves a test rig with basically a speaker load.
Yep.
But it sounds like crap, but it's mathematically definable so that we can, compare the test. So we're playing through this guitar amp silently but it's still super loud because everything, the transformers and everything are just, resonating and making noises that, vaguely correspond with what, the signals we're shooting through it.
You get a full ambient album right there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, just loop it for 24 hours.
Right.
And it is scary because that was a, pure beast. It's probably the loudest guitar amp I've been in the same room with. And playing it on full blast with it, 30 centimeters from your guitar. And it doesn't even have a loudspeaker, but it's still loud.
Yeah, amazing.
It feels like something is just going to pieces any second now.
Yeah.
That was scary.
Wait, are you guys in an office building with other tenants, or do you have like a standalone building?
We, above us, we have like the
people who hate you.
911 respondent center.
Oh, what a classic.
No, but they're cool. And I mean, we cannot be that loud. We need to, for our own sake. But we have a studio that we can use if we really need to be loud. But I mean, we're probably a more quiet company than most other companies, I think.
Yeah.
Right. I was thinking, so if anybody calls whatever the equivalent of 911 is over there, and they hear guitar in the background, they'll know what's going on.
All the floors shaking. What's going on? That's great. Hey, I've got one question, Niklas, and I picked this up on one of the interviews that you guys had online. That in 2018, you guys overhauled all the early plugin line. Can you tell us a bit about that? Was that some optimization or some enhancement with the modeling?
Oh man, am I supposed to remember that? We do stuff like that all the time.
Right.
But in general, it's very important for us to not change the way it sounds because the customer needs to go. I mean, if you need to go back and do a vocal up remix or something like that, then it should be possible. You should be able to trust the Softube stuff.
Yeah.
So normally it doesn't. If you can hear any difference, it's because you were actively looking for it in that case. But it's mostly. I mean, we update a lot of the frameworks. It's everything has a shared sort of framework. We update that all the time. So I think that every 2 months we release updated version of everything.
Right. Okay.
So we actually did quite recently. We did a big update where we added extra functionality to all the plugins, and I mean it's probably 80 plugins or so now.
Oh, wow. Okay. Right. So that's a constant. That's just a constant, thing.
Yeah, but we've been very adamant that keeping the same sound, and if we're updating the sound as we did with the TubeTech C1B, then we're keeping the old version behind, so that if you need to go back, you need to find that.
Yeah. Okay. So they'd have different plugin IDs, obviously, so that you can call up the older one. Yeah. Okay. Perfecto. Now, apart from your software and your DSP adventures, it was interesting when you said that you had a little piece of hardware that you had your guitar amp models on, and so you guys have released officially some hardware, which is your console 1, which is a pretty unique product, and I'll let you explain that to the listeners that aren't aware of it. If they've been under a rock for the last 4 years or so. And again, this was part of our pre-conversation where I said, when my reps actually presented this to me, I've gone, I like it. I understand what they're attempting to do, or not attempting to do, what they've actually done. But I was struggling a little bit saying, where's the market for this? Because usually my clients have come to me that want a tactile surface and a controller. They don't want it to control one plugin or one series of plugins. They want to be able to access, anything, whether it's a control or a fade or something like that. So it had me scratching my head a little bit, and I just thought, I like it, but I'm not quite getting it. And I'm going to let you explain it.
Yeah, we want to figure out what is the best way of making music with a computer. That's sort of what we're doing. Mm-hmm. What is the best way of making music with a computer? And we love gear, obviously, since we like knobs, we like the tactile thing.
Yes, of course.
And we had pretty much every control surface there is in our office.
Yep.
And, just lying around, it's like, why don't I use this and that for my own music making? Because it wasn't any fun. Setting up control surfaces, they didn't have a sound. It was nothing to learn. It's nothing that you could, dig deep into and be fluent in. I mean, that's not much to put on your resume. I'm fluent in Mackie Huey.
Yeah.
It's like, in some way, music making is about being creative, and you want to learn your instrument. And when it comes to mixing, you want to learn the tools that you use for mixing. And mixing engineer working on an SSL console knows where every knob is. They can make split-second decisions. They don't have to think about it.
Yep.
They can speak to someone, listening to the vocals, and they suddenly hear that the bass drum is a little bit too thick. So they immediately reach for that low cut,
Yep.
thin it out a little bit. So how do we translate this into the computer music world? Mm-hmm. It's like, because what happened to me back then, if I heard that the kick drum was too thick, I would have to cancel what I'm doing, which could be like comping vocals or something that is actually important.
Yep.
And try to figure out what plugin to use to apply a low pass filter or a low cut filter to the kick drum. So there's a lot of context switching going on, while on an analog desk, it's just
bang straight away.
Second nature.
Yep.
But we didn't want to go outside the box to achieve this, because strongly believe that it is a hassle. People won't wait for 4.5 minutes to bounce a 4.5 minute song. They want it to be 20 seconds like it should be. So we started thinking, how would we make the perfect control surface, and realized quite soon that it needs to have a sound, it needs to do something, it needs to have silk screened knobs and buttons on it, so that you can actually learn tactile, learning where your EQ is, where the threshold on the compressor is. And basically what we did was taking an SSL channel strip, which is vertical, and place it horizontal.
Yep.
Then add extra features like being able to control how much the console is saturating at the output and things like that.
Yep.
And easily being able to, instead of, having 128 rows of channels, you have just one channel, but you have selectors on the top where you can easily select which track you're going to edit.
Yep.
And instead of putting a back then expensive screen on it, we decided that you have a really nice computer screen in front of you, so you can easily just open that on-screen display with click of a button on the hardware.
Yep.
So the idea was basically that everything you can do from console 1, you should do from the hardware.
Yes.
And we had to, because this was an unknown concept when we did this. So we had to be really strict and adamant on the workflow, basically. So when you saw it back in 2014, we basically said that you use this with this workflow, this way or not at all.
Mm.
Because we needed to try to convince people that, okay, this is not a Mackie Huey 32 knobs kind of thing. This is something that you use in a specific way.
Yes.
And as as more people understood the product, we could open it up and loosen some of that, strictness and rigidness of the concept. But still, the main concept is one knob per function.
Yep.
And the Cons 1 fans are quite hardcore about it. And I love them.
Yes.
They are making fantastic music, and they have product ideas, feature suggestions all the time. But I can honestly say that whenever I get something regarding Console 1, I know that I should read it, because these customers, they know their shit.
Yeah,
Right.
Yeah. Well, that's actually good that you've got that community feedback, which is that was on my list a little bit further down, but we can probably chat a little bit more about that a little bit later. Now, one thing with Console 1 when it first came out, and I think it's part of the loosening, is that you had specific plugins. Well, you had plugins that were specific to Console 1, and now you've started offering those in a native format as well.
Yeah, I think we've been experimenting with. I mean, we don't really have a strategy for it. We had the specific ones. The console strips are usually modeled after console, and we had so many requests for making that British Class A console, making that as normal plugin. So it's like, yeah, why not?
Yep.
So it's not a big strategic thinking behind it. It's more like, okay, everyone seems to want this, so yeah, let's give it to them.
Yeah, and it's a fantastic plugin as well. So that's good. Now, one, if I may ask you,
it's your show.
Yes. Yeah, but you're the special guest. Now, I've got present challenges of staying ahead of the curve with cross-platform stuff. So this is specifically about coding for Windows and Mac specifically. You don't do any Linux stuff, so we can leave that off the table. But you also code for UAD, and I think like in that article that I read, you were mentioning being able to shift the code over to other DSPs reasonably easy.
Yeah.
Is that? Can you give us some insight on that, please?
It's technically how it's done is that we have, from the mathematical equations, basically, we create discrete time, because the math is continuous time, can never be run on a finite time processor. So convert that into discrete time model, do everything we need to do with that, and then we have a system that tries to write code from that. Mm-hmm. And in some cases, if it's stuff that is used a lot of times, like say a linear filter, then it has some pre-optimized blocks that it can use. And we actually have a code generator for generating those blocks. If it's something that is used a lot, then we write vectorized different, optimized versions of that block, which gets populated with the data from the equations, basically. So this process is in C, where it was the last time I did this, but I've actually seen that there are some C++ templates stuff going in there right now, so it's technically not C anymore, I guess. But it's
C with classes.
Yeah, probably. I shouldn't even speak about these things because that's when it comes to templates, I'm lost. I like the math, not the coding. Anyway, that is fairly platform agnostic. So if we need to do something for a specific chip, we can compile it for that chip. We can see how it runs. We might figure out that, okay, this part was heavily optimized for x86 Intel processors with vectorized stuff. We need to do something else, equivalent thing for this chip. And then we do it, and then we have it in our library. But the bottom line is that the DSP is never difficult. It's extremely well defined, and it's island, basically. It has an input, it has an output, it has parameters and meters, and that's pretty much it.
So your source of truth then for all these things you're doing is really going back to the math, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Nice.
But the when it comes to, as you mentioned, platform compatibility and Windows and Apple Silicon, things like that, the DSP is never a problem. It's everything else. Right. I mean, you can be, and if you've been doing this for 20 years, you can have some sort of, could be anything, like graphics library that has a dependency on some older version of something, and then you have to either exchange that or wait for that to get updated, and then you start to build these dependencies. And I mean, we have a long list of stuff that we need to get before we can actually release a Apple Silicon version.
Yeah,
but it doesn't mean that we can build a DSP. It's not. You just need all the other stuff. You need the preset management, and you need the UIs, and you need the packaging, and probably being able to read and write files or whatever it could be. That is a problem.
Yeah. Well, we should talk a little bit more about the Apple Silicon, because that is, and your navigation or navigating your products to the M1. Apple, their original premise was that it was going to be very, very easy and very quick, and then they offered that Rosetta as their stepping stone. Can you give us some insight on the M1 transition for you without giving too much away?
I don't know if I can give too much away because I'm not. I don't know enough about it. What I do know is that Rosetta seems to be amazing. Mm-hmm. It's I'm doing all the development right now on an M1 MacBook Air running Rosetta.
Yep.
And it's still faster than my MacBook Pro that I have next to this computer.
Yep.
So I mean, it's for us as a company, it's obvious that the Mac part of the business is Apple Silicon going forward.
Yes.
So we need to be there.
Yeah.
And it seems like a step ahead. For us, it's just another transition. We've been through the PowerPC to Intel.
So you guys are not there yet with the native M1 products?
No, we're, as I mentioned, we have a bunch of stuff. It's like if you're a startup or a smaller company. If this was, for instance, when the PowerPC to Intel transition, we'd only been around for a couple of years. That was easy because we didn't have all those dependencies.
Yes.
And it could be, dependencies, technical dependencies, but it's also contractual dependencies with other partner companies.
Right.
So there's all this, basically bureaucracy that we need to solve, and we need to deliver stuff, and we need to... everything is just, we're so much slower now than what we would like to be. But we're working on it, and it's fantastic, and I can't wait.
It's not so much that, say, the development effort's slow, just you guys have so much stuff, like you were saying now, that like there are lots of dependencies, but also you just have a lot of products now that you have to, that you'd have to go through and do the conversion on.
Yeah, but I mean, we build everything nightly, so I mean, I'm totally speaking from it's not my expertise here, but I can imagine, say that we were to have everything in order, all the libraries and stuff and dependencies in order, and then we turn it on. We're probably going to spend 2 weeks figuring out why the build servers are failing every night.
Right.
Why are they timing out? Why aren't we getting these certificates from different big software OS manufacturers that we need certificates from?
Was that a hint? was that a hint, Nicholas?
No, but it's always something, and I think that just has to do with we've been so focused on making products instead of We want to make products. We want to make stable products. We want to minimize the amount of bugs that can go in a product. So we're always quite hesitant in changing to the latest and greatest.
Yes.
So,
Yep. No, of course.
But we're getting there. Just takes time.
Yeah. The reason I find that interesting is that the Mac fraternity are quite energetic when it comes to proclaiming how the M1 was basically going to be changing the game and taking over everything. And I was kind of expecting that by the end of this year, because originally Apple said, well, we're going to be doing the transition from Intel to Apple Silicon completely by the end of 2021. Now, I don't see that happening. Just before I hit record today, I think today is going to be the announcement of the new M1s, M1X, M1. I think it's one M1X, and I had a bit of a read of what's coming. It's the identical processor. Chip architecture from the original one. There's more larger cores, and there's enhanced GPU capability. But I'm going, well, where's the big multi-core monster? So I think it's 8 cores, eight larger cores. So they're not aiming at the top end just yet. So.
No, I mean, IKEA has problem delivering refrigerators because of the silicone shortage. So
yeah, but I think Apple Silicon and
you mean that IKEA doesn't use Apple Silicon?
No, what I mean is that I think the challenges are a little bit different there, and I think Apple probably have a little bit more, wiggle room and arm wrestling capability than IKEA in getting their chips fabbed up. I just find it to me, I think it's just interesting that they're not going to deliver that big monster.
Yeah, I think that the problem for pros in general is that very few need those big monsters of computers.
Yes.
I mean, I see a lot of really big productions being performed on MacBook Pro.
Yep.
So I can, from a product perspective, product business perspective, I can understand why they're not doing that. But of course, it would be super nice to get a awesome Mac Pro.
Yep. Yeah. Well, and it's interesting that what you've just said there is that in the previous conversations with numerous DAW developers, and I was always bringing up, well, what's your maximum core count because that you're developing for? And the answers were quite interesting and varied, but the short answer was that they're not really focusing or developing on high core machines, which kind of surprised me a bit. Because my whole core clientele are coming to me for these big monster multi-core machines, 16, 18 core machines, 128 to 256 gigabyte of RAM, masses of storage. Yeah. These are professional composers.
Yeah.
They're not going to pull that off on a laptop. Doesn't matter how good the M1 is. But I can also understand from a business perspective. And there was an interesting comment from one of the developers when I've just said, "Well, what's your maximum? What core count are you focusing on?" They said average core count. And then I pressed a little bit harder and said, "Well, what's the average core count you're working on?" They said 12, and it's 12 logical. And I went, "Oh, what?" So it was surprising for me, but then again, some of the things that I've been navigating with these higher core machines, with pretty much all of the DAWs, everything starts getting a bit squirrely above. This again we've discussed it before. There seems to be this glass ceiling around 32 logical cores, and anything above that starts getting a little bit weird. And no one could give me a straight answer, and that's not something I'm expecting you to.
No, I have. I mean, we, as a plugin manufacturer, we don't really have to bother about that. So
no. Well, you're not multi-threading the plugins, so
not the DSP. No.
I was actually kind of hoping that Apple's latest offering was going to be at that really kind of high core count so that we could get more industry attention on that. But
yeah. I think that, I mean, there are some problems, especially, it really depends on how the DSP model looks. For polyphony and a synth, it's definitely possible to do multi-threading, but for our modular synth, where basically everything is one big thing, right, with a lot of feedback. It's probably the one product that we have that would benefit the most from multi-threading. It's just a very, very complicated technical problem. It's not fast enough, basically, to do.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing is that once you do introduce your independent multiprocessing, then that's got to then work hand in hand with the multiprocessing scheduling with the DAW, and that has its own problems.
Yeah. And the way our customers are using stuff like Console One is you put it across the board on all the different tracks, and then you can get it on different cores because you put it on different tracks.
Yeah, of course. And it's amazing how a lot of end users still to this day don't understand how the multiprocessing and the scheduling is actually handled by the DAW. They don't quite realize it's actually track-based. And so I've always talked about vertical versus horizontal processing. So vertical is, where it's all landing on one core and it's all in one channel. And then horizontal is across the multiple tracks. So, and that's the core versus clock argument, clock versus core argument. So, always interesting challenges. Again, because I'm not a coder, I'm coming from a layman's perspective. I'm sitting back going, well, I've got this this 16 core 32 thread machine. Why can't the software actually talk to it? So now we're talking, up to 64 core 128 thread. There's no way that the DAWs are getting anywhere near being able to handle that level of thread count. And even the 3264, we've done some testing with those thread rippers, and it's almost quite comical. Half of the threads are getting missed and ignored, and it's just collapsing on itself. And with this thought, wow, when is this actually going to be coming about? But the point that you made is that there's not a lot of people that you need to cater for at that level, but there are, quite a few that are heading into that area.
But it's the MI industry in itself is ridiculously small.
Yeah,
and the amount that needs 64 core machines is probably, it's a subset of that. It's just, if you count the amount of companies that build these machines, you probably know, everyone in Europe and everyone in the US personally. So, obviously it's not a huge market.
No.
Yeah.
No.
And good multi-threading is hard.
Yeah.
So nobody's going to do it until they have to do it,
Yeah. And just to throw another, nice little curve into that mix is, with the new Intel 12th gen with the big little, they call it big little, but it's obvious, you got the full cores, and then you got the smaller cores, and then they got a thing called a thread director, which is some component of the CPU that is then talking to the OS schedulers to define what's a big core, what's a little core.
Yeah, then you have instruction set differences across the cores, which is fun.
Yeah. And then the software is going to have to be able to define the big or the little, or is that at the scheduler level? So there's all of these questions. And I've got some preliminary stuff on the 12th gen that was delivered to me this week because it's not too far away. And the question I asked is, how about Windows 10? And I know Pete was not really giving me too much there, but I've got some info that there is going to be some limited thread director activity on Windows 10. And it's not the full bottle, but there is going to be some compatibility with the 12th gen on Windows 10, but primarily they're going to be targeting Windows 11 with that one, which is going to be interesting. I'm just still got my arms crossed going. I want to see how this thread scheduling works and how it's going to define and arbitrate between the smaller cores and the full-blown hyper-threaded ones.
I think we need to figure out if it's good for this industry or if we need to stick to the old model for this industry. It's really good for some others, but to be determined here. Yeah,
well, the interesting thing is that you can't stick to the old model because that's Intel's roadmap forward is the big little, So it'll be interesting how that 12th gen works on Windows 10. That's one focus, I think. And then I've got some news that was just confirmed about the HEDT platform. And I remember I said something in January saying, well, I've finally seen it on a roadmap, but it's Q3 2022. They can't possibly be stretching it that long. Yes, Pete, confirmed. They're stretching Q3 2022. So again, that just brings back the going, well, how much of a market are those larger HEDT systems? Obviously, Intel are gone, no, we have to target the M1 onslaught.
They're not mass market. We want them, but just like Niklas was saying, that's not the majority of the customers here.
No. And again, it's frustrating for me because the majority of my clients are these large, core systems. Look, this might sound odd to some people listening in, but I'm more than happy that X299 is going to go to Q3 next year because there might be a slight refresh on the CPUs. And to have a platform that is that solid for that amount of time for me is like, I've instead of having to run into R&D cycles Z490. I didn't sign off that long ago, and I'm about to dive headlong into the Z590. And I'm going, just slow down a little bit here, guys. So I need to have a bit of a breath, get a product to market, get it settled, and then instead of throwing curves at me, and like even Thunderbolt 4, Pete. I know we're drifting off a little bit, but Thunderbolt 4, none of the adapters work. None of the adapters from Thunderbolt 4 back to Thunderbolt 2. So anyone who buys a new system's got a Thunderbolt 2 audio interface. Bye-bye. Doesn't work.
Really? That's not how I understand that, but I haven't tested it myself yet.
The adapters are not working, bud. The adapters.
Oh.
They can claim that, it's backwards compatible. The adapters going back, the Thunderbolt 3 to Thunderbolt 2 adapters are not working on the Thunderbolt 4.
I actually have a bunch of those there and some interfaces that I'm going to do some testing once my Surface shows up. So I'll see what
that's got the Thunderbolt 4, yeah. I haven't. Yeah. I'm not touching it till Z590, and then I'll do it all at once because it was enough of a arm wrestle, as you know, with Z490 and Thunderbolt, let alone now diving into Z590. So that's always a moving target. But the other interesting aspect of that is that and it's a knock-on effect from the A to D and D to A's, but a lot of the Thunderbolt interfaces are kind of going the way of a dodo. I can't go mentioning brands because some of them have still got some stocks, but they're not being renewed. Very interesting. So
is that due to the factory damage, or?
Yeah, it was due to and basically the amount of R&D that would be required to basically redevelop the products.
Yeah, that's sad.
So some of the products have already been re-engineered. Some of the brands have been already re-engineered. RME have got some out. Focusrite have got some out with the new replacement A to D and D to A's. But some of the other companies are going, no, we're scrapping the whole thing. So it's
too bad because that's just cost that the MI industry is going to have a hard time absorbing. So
and it's too small to be able to actually absorb a lot of that, and then I'm hearing the whispers of the individual component prices going through the roof as well.
If you combine all that with work to support M1 and then work to support Thunderbolt 4, that's a lot of non-feature work happening in companies right now.
Massive, massive, yeah.
That's absolutely true.
Yeah. So with your one piece of hardware that you guys do, the Console 1, are you guys being affected at all by any of these chip shortages? Because I know there's no A to D and D to A's, but there seems to be like a global chip shortage. Are you guys affected at all?
Yeah, it is. It's prices on key components are going up. Some of them are, tenfold.
Wow.
Delivery times are going up. Everyone wants to ship stuff. So it's difficult to get, shipping made. Just getting your stuff in a container on a big boat is very difficult.
Yep.
So everything is difficult right now.
Yeah.
Luckily, I mean, we don't. The worst thing that can happen if we're changing a component is that it breaks.
Yep.
We're not going to kill anyone.
Right. Yeah.
We're not building trucks or medical safety equipment. So I think that a lot of companies have a much harder time than us to basically trying to figure out what components they're supposed to be using because they're in a some sort of critical industry that you cannot just change microcontroller in a truck. It's
Yeah.
So I mean we're lucky that way, but it is difficult. It is.
Yeah, and look, I can feel what you're saying about the shipment. I mean, we're right over the other side of the planet, and component supply. My business is crippled at the moment with computer component supply stuff, and it's across the board, So
ouch.
That's been very, very difficult for me, it's interesting with the ETAs. So and even audio supply stuff. You got an ETA? Yep. I can guarantee you the first ETA is always missed. and sometimes it's missed to the point they don't even know it's been missed until they go, well, where's the container? They're going, oh, guess what? Didn't even make it on the ship, right? And so we're talking, all of a sudden then there's another 6 to 8 weeks on top of where you're expecting stuff to land. There's another 6 to 8 weeks. But anyhow, look, we're drifting way off. We're drifting way off the map here. So one question that I always like asking the developers is your interaction with your end users. Now, you did mention that you really liked interacting with the guys from Console One. So do you guys get a lot of interaction and feedback from the end users that you take on board and implement if you can?
Yeah, I mean, that's the whole point of making products is to have an end user. And if you want to make products for the end user, you need to listen to what they say. So yeah, but we never had like Softube forum going on, and we haven't been that, personally that present. I think I don't really know why, but it's like when we started out selling very expensive hardware for TDM systems, it was like customers get in touch with us anyway. It wasn't this huge consumer market. Everyone that was, spending hundreds of dollars on a plugin, they knew that they pretty much had a, phone number to the developer.
Yeah.
And that is sort of something I like about the whole industry, which is, both good and bad, but it's going away more and more. But people expect if you buy a high-end compressor, hardware, you expect to pretty much know the person who built it.
Yeah,
it's a very small and familiar business. So we have a lot of contact with people, that way. Just reaching out to us, emailing us, saying something, and we read everything, we think about everything, and it's more often than not very good ideas. So it's basically us, okay, where can we put this in the roadmap, or is this matching the roadmap, or do we need to think of another product that we can put these great ideas into?
Yeah, and look, and that's awesome that you guys have got the hands-on. Not all companies are that open and forward with communicating with their end users, and I suppose that probably becomes a problem the bigger that the company gets. But so look, it's good to hear that you guys are so hands-on with the end user feedback. And you mentioned forums. It's a two-edged sword. But
there are pluses and minuses.
Yeah, that's a two-edged sword with forums. Sometimes the signal to noise is just worthless.
Yeah, but we have a large beta community that's. I much rather have like a two-way discussion with someone, getting to see their workflow, see their pain points, trying to figure out how can we alleviate those pain points.
Yep.
And that is probably more important than just taking on a feature suggestion or a solution right away.
Yep.
It's more like, okay, why did you come to this feature being the solution to your problem?
Yep.
And can we solve this problem instead of adding that feature?
Yep. So the beta list, is that something that the beta list, the members of the beta list themselves can actually communicate together, or is it just simply you've got guys on beta that report directly?
That's more of a forum. They communicate together. Sometimes we start threads that, basically saying that I can say that I don't want to be involved in this thread because I just want to see where it goes. And when it's, release candidate 5, then we're probably very much hands-on trying to figure out why we need to have 5 release candidates.
Yes, of course, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I truly enjoy our beta forum and all the fantastic people that are on there. Because I mean, they do this. I mean, they produce music for a living.
Yep.
They have to live with our bad decisions.
Yep. Yeah. And look, and I think that's like myself and Pete both said, there's good and bad about the public forums, but sometimes the signal to noise just drowns out any type of productive or viable type of conversation. So these more private beta lists, as long as they're active, I've been involved in numerous beta lists over the years. Some of them literally have been as useless as tits on a bull.
Yeah, and I mean that's never the beta tester's fault. It's always the administrators or the company's fault. I mean, we need to engage them, and we need to discuss. But the problems with forums is usually that you get one or two persons that think they know things, think they know why you have that type of aliasing in a compressor algorithm, and then they use their newly bought frequency analyzer to try to,
Yep.
A little knowledge is a dangerous thing.
Yeah.
It is. It's like I always used to say that a computer mess with you on the level you're at.
Yep. Yeah.
So if you know much, then you have big problems. On the other hand, it's very refreshing in a forum where you have this type of alpha person showing up and they actually know their shit. And that happens a lot as well. They, those that can say that, no, you cannot use a frequency analyzer for these kind of tests.
Yeah. Yeah, like I said, signal to noise. I think it has actually dropped off over the years, unfortunately, though. But and whether that's a different demographic of people coming on, or whether a lot of the more knowledgeable people have veered off the whole forum platform idea. I think social media has a lot to do there, and
there are a lot of really good discussions on Twitter, for instance.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I don't tweet. Pete tweets.
Yeah, I do. It sounds like you have a really healthy attitude towards community and how to interact and get the most out of them there. So that's always good to hear.
I mean, you always need to remember that we're in this industry. We started this company because we love making music. And then we have, our customers are people who also love making music. They're just, better at doing that than us. So it's, I think that as soon as we start to see the customer as something else, as, just something we sell to, or something that it doesn't have a relation, we don't have a relation to, or as soon as we don't see ourselves as a customer, then I think we're in, big trouble. And I've seen that happen with businesses in our audio industry where they, get that sort of disconnect between their customers and products departments or whatever, C-suites, or whatever it could be. And I think that could work in other industries, but not as in my industries now, because customers still expect this business to be a business. You can hand a guitar to any CEO that you meet at NAMM, and they can play guitar because they're in this business because they love making music.
Yes, and
it's extremely rare that you get executives that doesn't care about the music production industry.
Yep. Yeah.
That aren't passionate about gear or synths or whatever it is. I mean, then you speak about the Prophet and the Juno, and in some sense that's why you're doing this. And that's why I love this business. It's just very, very important to remember that that's why we are selling gear to music producers and music makers, is because we want to be music makers, music producers. We want to be a part of that.
Yep.
Yeah, well said.
Yeah, 100%. Look, I think we've all been in the industry long enough to see when you've got people that start off with all of the passion and everything else, and then as the company gets bigger, maybe they get some other investors, and then all of a sudden it becomes more about KPIs, KPIs and improving your market share, or trying to grab more of a market share that it's already saturated. And I've been in plenty of those discussions in my 25 plus years of doing this stuff. And, some of those companies, they start, shedding off all of the key developers and that type of stuff, thinking that, these people are easily replaceable. And I don't have to name them. Some of these guys are larger guys, and it becomes very hands off.
Yeah, but I mean, I think in the end, there are probably much easier ways of making money than entering the music instrument industry.
Yeah, no, of course, yeah.
I wouldn't invest my money on the stock market if it just contained a lot of MI brands.
Yeah, no, of course, and we've seen a lot of those brands get, then they get acquired by larger companies, and then the whole that could sometimes work very well or end in tears. But I think that's a whole other show. I think Nicholas and
could be
and Pete. We're approaching. Not quite 2 hours, but we're getting up to that, around that, close to the 2 hour mark. So I think we should put a pin in it, and I think we should just close off for today. And you guys are both more than welcome to come back again for another round 2. I think it'll be interesting once Apple do release all of their M1. They unleash the larger products and stuff, and I think it'd be worth a revisit just to see where all the development stuff is. And with that, I think, look, it's been great today. I've really enjoyed chatting to you both again. Nicholas, I mean, it's very, very insightful. I've been completely intrigued by this whole component level modeling stuff, and thank you for your time and energy today in explaining that, and hopefully that you've enjoyed it enough to come back again at some point.
Absolutely, it was a lot of fun. It felt like listening in on two grown-ups having a conversation when you were discussing Intel models there for a while. It's not my expertise, but it was very, very nice talk. And I think that just as an end note, we were speaking about the community. One thing that I think is important for everyone that's part of the MI industry right now is that we see this huge democratization of the whole MI industry going on. It is possible to make a number one album from your MacBook Air or Surface.
Without doubt, yeah.
And we just need to make sure that that process is ongoing and that it's inclusive. So it's not only engineer guys like us doing this, but everyone.
Definitely.
And it should be, we have a huge overweight on men making music, and there's absolutely no reason for that more than that, maybe those guys came into the industry because they, liked the, building their own computers or whatever. But we should make sure that we use this whole process that's going on to make the whole music making easier and more accessible to everyone.
Yep.
I think that's the biggest challenge in our industry.
Yep, 100%, 100%. All right, guys. I think we can close off now. Again, thank you to you both for your time and energy. That has been awesome.
Thank you, Vin.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. And all right, so I think with that, on to the next.